Alright. Alright, so the last topic today is global media, and global media comes up again in grade 12, and you saw it to some extent in grade 9 last year in chapter 1. In grade 12, we'll be looking at the media under authoritarian states and the role that the media plays there, and we'll be looking at the media in a democracy to the extent that the lesson that you're about to see is basically the same as what you'll see in grade 12. So, in an authoritarian state, the role of the media is meant to be the loudspeaker of the government. So under Adolf Hitler, the media served the government. It was an instrument of indoctrination, of propaganda. It spread the vision, the plan that the government had. So government policies were promoted and celebrated through the media. In Canada, yes, we do have a federally owned media, which potentially could be a threat to democracy. In other countries, the majority of the media, other democratic countries, the majority of the media is owned by corporations, which too could be a threat to democracy. So hopefully at the end of today's lesson, you'll understand what role the media should be playing in a democracy and how the concentration of ownership of the media may end up being a threat to democracy. So the first idea that we want you to understand is something we mentioned a couple of lessons ago, is that the media is meant to be a watchdog. So media is meant to sound the alarm when something is wrong. When the government is violating the social contract with the people, for example, in the United States with the Watergate scandal, when members of the media found out that the ruling party, the Republicans, they were eavesdropping on the opponents, the Democrats, during an election. They were putting listening devices in the hotel that was known as the Watergate Hotel in Washington. Once the media found out about that, they thought that that was illiberal, that was anti-liberal, that was non-liberal, that was something you wouldn't expect from a democratic government. Unfortunately, here in Canada, we are no strangers to scandals. So we have a link here, and if you go to the link, you can see a list of scandals, including our very most recent We Charity controversy from 2020. So when members of the media find out about scandals involving the government, whether it be the We Charity controversy or the blackface scandal involving our dear Prime Minister, it's the media's responsibility in a democracy to educate the people, to sound the alarm, so that the people can express their will and hold the government accountable. The government cannot be legitimate if they're not held accountable. In a democracy, accountability and legitimacy must come from the people, but the people need to be educated and informed. So therefore, it's the responsibility, it's the role of the media to educate and to inform the people so that the people can hold the government accountable. And unfortunately, as you can see here, if we scroll backwards chronologically through the history of Canada, you can see a number of violations of ethics. So even our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, he's been involved in at least 1, 2, 3, 4 major scandals, and yet he's still our Prime Minister. So when our politicians are breaking ethical law, the RCMP investigates them, but the media also needs to inform us, the electorate, as to how they're violating the social contract. Now, when we think of the watchdog role of the media, perhaps the name Edward Snowden might pop into your mind. Well, who's Edward Snowden? Edward Snowden was a CIA employee and a subcontractor at the NSA, and he found information that he felt was disturbing. The level of invasion that the US government had of the privacy of the Americans, that the American people were unaware of how invasive the US federal government through the NSA was being, how much Big Brother-like they were being in terms of watching the American citizens. So Snowden ended up copying and leaking classified information so that he could better educate the people as to what their relationship with their government really was. the level of privacy that had been violated due to the USA Patriot Act. And because of his work here, he had to flee the United States, and he lives abroad because the US federal government sees this as criminal activity. He's saying as a whistleblower, he's fulfilling that role that the media is meant to play, which is being a watchdog of democracy, that they're sounding the alarm that something's wrong. If you don't have an independent media, if the media serves a master, then it's hard for the media to be a watchdog. If the media must answer first to the government, then the media is not going to expose the WE scandal. If the media must first answer to the government, you won't have members in a non-stream media kind of fashion, like Edward Snowden, releasing information through Wikipedia. But we have an issue, and the issue is concentration of ownership of the media. So there's different ways to look at this. This is showing some of the major assets that 6 major corporations own almost all of the media. So you have this conglomeration. And within this conglomeration, you have Viacom, you have lots of different things like Paramount Films and CBS and Nickelodeon. And when you have a conglomerate, when you have many companies owned by the same holding, it can become quite confusing to the consumer. So a consumer may seek out information from 2, 3, 4, 5 of these different media companies, and they may keep getting the same message, and they might say, well, that must be true then. Well, little do they realize they're getting one message because they're all owned by one individual or one conglomeration. And this isn't just mainstream media, this impacts the internet as well. Maybe more famously, you can look at Disney and its holdings with ABC and obviously Fox and Lucas, and it just keeps growing to the point that it becomes confusing as to, would ABC air an expose that is showing the dark side of Marvel or the dark side of Fox? What's happening at Fox Studios that is against labor laws? Well, ABC, the news reporting station, they're not going to report on how ABC News isn't going to report on the negative side of what's happening at Disney, right? They're not going to report on the labor conflict at Disney. So because Disney owns ABC News, they can use ABC News as a tool to promote their brand. And consumers don't see it. It's subtle. Unfortunately, there's many examples. You can see another conglomerate here. So these 6 major conglomerations own almost all of the major media. When we look at some of these media conglomerations, these companies, their revenue, and when we say revenue, we're not saying how much their assets are worth if they had to liquidate. We're just talking about a revenue in one year, one business year. AT&T's revenue this year will be $181 billion US. Some of these media conglomerates are larger than major nations of the world. That their revenue might be greater than a nation like Finland's GDP. So that's the power of these transnationals, and you can guarantee that if they have that kind of power, they're not going to want to willingly give it up. So one of the issues is, how can you be a watchdog if you are controlled by some other interest, like a conglomeration, like transnationals? Maybe you become their lapdog. So just like in Nazi Germany, where the government-controlled media would spin stories to create narratives that supported the agenda of the Nazi government, billionaires now have a monopoly of control of the media today. And you can guarantee that they spin stories so that they can create a narrative that supports their agenda. So in fact, under these conditions, the media can become more than just a lapdog, but they become an attack dog. An attack dog attempting to discredit any opposition. There is a war of opinion in America, and by extension in Canada today, where we have seen the concept of fake news created to serve this very purpose. So we have this idea that even if it's not true, if we say it enough times and loud enough, it becomes what is true. That's a very dangerous, very manipulative thing to think. Even if it's not true, we can create what's true by saying it enough times. That's Orwellian thinking, this idea of indoctrinating people through the media. And you can see it. You can see that people honestly believe things that are invalid just because they've been told it by enough different companies, but they don't understand that those companies are all part of one conglomeration, or that these conglomerations are all part of that 1%, that elite. Sometimes the attack dog is more of a clown dog. So in ancient Rome, the masses, the plebeians, they would be distracted by the bread and circus that the patricians, that the Caesars, that those in charge of Rome would provide for them. So that the plebeians that were more in number, the plebeians should have been able to control Rome. They had the power of number, but they didn't control Rome because they were distracted. So those that were getting rich from the Roman Empire, they put on some circuses in the Colosseum, they handed out free bread, they kept the masses distracted so that they could gather the wealth. We see a lot of distribution of wealth from us to the 1%, and we're being distracted. There's a magic show happening right now. There's lots of diversion of our attention. Why are we not talking about Hillary Clinton being on trial today? Is that going to be on the news today? Or are they going to be talking about COVID-19 more? So we live in a very fractured existence of reality. It's a fictional world, really. And as we mentioned the other day, this is a world of escapism. That Disney literally is that idea that I can escape my painful reality and exist through, some kind of science fiction. This will only become more dangerous as we have technology like virtual reality that won't just blur the lines between what is real and what is not, but it'll get to the Matrix-like point where we will enter into a virtual reality, a narrative that is more cleansing to us, and we won't want to leave. We will have people opting in, but they won't opt out. They will want to live in that reality, a fantasy world. And while you submit yourself to that mind prison, the elite will be able to control the real world. So, we have this cartoon for you guys to play with, and I'm going to pause the video because I don't think we need to do another cartoon analysis on the video. We have 12 minutes left in class. I'm going to give you about 8 to figure out what's happening in the cartoon, and then the final 4 minutes of class we'll figure out if we knew what it was. Next day we're going to move on to globalization, good or bad, the controversy surrounding it, which is kind of a wrap up of this unit.